Joining us right now, South Dakota Governor KRISTI Noem, who has been in this battle. I was going to pull up her book cover because I hit it. It's a neat book cover. Not My First Rodeo, Lessons from the Heartland. That could be used to describe so many things. Governor, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. I appreciate it.
I have to ask for your reaction to some cable news networks that normally I don't think would ever report on the unpopularity of a Democrat president. I noticed she didn't touch on the record high low approval that Biden has, which seems to plummet every single week. We have a new low. But what does that signal to you that it seems like he's losing the backers in media?
Yeah, I think that they're trying to wake up the administration any way that they can and say, listen, get with reality. This is about America and people still live here that have to vote for you. So give them something. Give them one thing that they can wrap their arms around. Even if they're extremist Democrats right now, I'm sure they don't recognize a lot of what Joe Biden is doing. He's doing absolutely nothing to address the challenges they deal with every day. And it points to a lot of Democrats losing seats across the country at every level of government.
Yeah, I saw that Gavin Newsom is getting ready for 2024. J.B. Pritzker, apparently. I don't think that you can look at the records of these governors, or Phil Murphy out of New Jersey. Who was the other one? Police out of Colorado. I don't think you can look at the records of these governors and think that that's anything that American voters would want, especially since Pritzker was headed to, he ran to Florida. Newsom, he's losing everybody to my state, Texas. I don't think that's going to go over so well for them. What are your thoughts on that field in 2024?
Well, I feel like what Newsom is doing is just handing out checks every time he needs votes. Every time it comes around, the chance for people to go actually vote on him and support him, he sends them another check and they cash it that week and then go vote. It's unbelievable to me and it's unsustainable. And that's the thing, is that California is absolutely going to be completely devastated. That state has been given the greatest gift God's ever seen in weather, landscape, topography, and natural resources, and he has just finished the destruction of that state. People are flocking to leave, and they're coming to states like South Dakota. It's pretty hard for South Dakota to compete with California sometimes when you talk about the weather and the beaches, but they'd way rather be here than they would in states under those bad leaders, governors like Pritzker and Polis and Newsom. They're just absolutely devastating the people that live in their state.
Yeah, I just hope that they leave their voting. They change their voting habits if they come to South Dakota.
Well, we've been kind of keeping track of how they register when they come here, and overwhelmingly, when people arrive at our state, they're immediately registering and registering Republicans. So if you ask them, I meet people every day in our state that have moved here in the last couple of years, and they say, we came here because we wanted to live where the government respected us. We came here because we saw your commercials on TV talking about this great state. We came to visit and we met the people and we decided we wanted this to be our family. And I think that's pretty remarkable. And our economy's booming. Number one economy in the country. We are a state that our kids are overachieving. We're the number one educational outcomes for our kids. Less than 1,000 people in the entire state on unemployment. Our incomes are going up faster than anywhere else in the country. And they understand their God-given rights. Constitutional carry was the very first bill that I signed when I became governor. A previous Republican governor had vetoed that bill a couple of times, but people today in South Dakota recognize they want their rights defended. And in our state this year, you'll love this, Dana, we actually went out and said, you know what, we're waiving all fees on our permits in South Dakota. It is, and I'm not even going to pay for your federal background checks. So in South Dakota, to exercise your Second Amendment rights, it won't cost you a dime, and we're going to defend your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, and we're going to continue to fight off Joe Biden's America.
Very interesting, because I don't think in Texas they do something like that. And we're talking with Governor KRISTI Noem, and I believe that was Senate Bill 212. And so no longer will people in South-Dakotans, they will no longer have to pay to receive their concealed carry permit. Because in some states, and I realize that the price, in New York, it can be expensive. In Illinois, you have to get a permit to buy and then a secondary permit. It gets a little bit, for the lack of a better way to say it, it's a little class warfare, because you're penalizing people for exercising a natural right. This and these fees, and this was just implemented, correct me if I'm wrong, Governor, end of last month, correct?
Yes, it was something that I put in my budget, said I wanted to do as governor, and the legislature did support that at the end of the day in the budget, and so it's in effect today in South Dakota, and we're very proud of it. I think it's important that states recognize their right to govern close to home, and that we continue to fight and give people a little bit of hope in this country right now. You look at what's happening across the country, you see states where the law is ignored. We see a federal government that ignores the law, frankly, down at the southern border. They want to see some leaders that really still value what made this country great.
Now, I've seen that some say, well, South Dakotans don't want to have to pay for other people's, for their background checks, et cetera. There was Secretary of State Steve Barnett told the Joint Appropriations Committee earlier this year that the state could lose between $100,000 and $250,000. But I mean, my counter to that is, I mean, my tax money is taken from me. It's government theft. It's taken away from me and used towards Planned Parenthood. I mean, that's where, when I think 5 years ago, everyone really learned what the word fungible meant. But I mean, what do you say to that when you have those objections come up from taxpayers in South Dakota, or obviously party opposition?
Well, what he's talking about is a loss of revenue to the state, which isn't. It's the people's money. We should never forget that. It's the people's money, and should they be spending it to exercise a constitutional right? That's the question that was in front of the legislature that I asked them to consider. And frankly, South Dakota has historic revenues coming in right now. We have incredible money coming in, hundreds of millions of dollars in increased revenues because of what we've done here. We don't have income taxes. We don't have corporate income taxes. We don't have personal property taxes. All we have is a 4.5-cent sales tax that largely funds state government. And because of that tax environment and our attitude towards government and the role in people's lives, we're thriving. People are coming here. Businesses are growing. People's careers are advancing. They're making more money. And even the state budget is impacted by that. We have dollars that we can use to make long-term investments and pay off bonds and debt of the state. But we also can do incredible things like return dollars back to people who want to exercise their constitutional rights.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, fiscal responsibility, which is nothing that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now. Speaking of federal, talking with Governor KRISTI Noem, Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health, that Supreme Court decision handed down. It just takes it back to the states. Nothing's banned, nothing's criminalized. It's just, if it's not in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it's supposed to revert back to the states anyway. I thought people liked the Constitution, but apparently some haven't read it. Tell us how that is affecting that, I don't want to say practice, but what does the lay of the land look like in South Dakota now that Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health is law of the land? I know some states have trigger laws that have come into effect. I think that obviously to protect the life of the mother, it is still allowed. Tell me about that in your state.
Sure. What the Supreme Court did was it fixed a wrong decision that was made almost 50 years ago. And so by doing this and overturning Roe, they returned the decision, you're right, back to the states. The legislators will make those decisions, hearing from the people closer to home, which is entirely appropriate. And every state's laws will look different. Back in 2005, the South Dakota passed a trigger law that said that at the time Roe was overturned, it would be illegal to get an abortion in our state except to save the life of a mother. So that is the law of the land today. And I think that is a discussion that people will continue to have from state to state. I'm just grateful that South Dakota is where it's at in taking a defense of life, and that it's recognizing that every life is precious. It's very different than what's happening in New York, where their governor has embraced a legacy of death. She said she wants to become known as a destination for people to travel to get their abortions. And that's just not our story here. And I think that I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, I've never understood a lot of the argument for this as well. I'm sure you've seen this, because I've seen a lot of, you want to talk about disinformation, whether it's Hollywood actors or actresses saying, oh, well, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you're going to die because, your state can't have an abortion. Well, that's gaslighting about women's health. That is not a viable pregnancy in the first place. What are your thoughts on just some of the bad narratives regarding women's health that are being put out there? I feel like, if they're going to spend money on anything in these states like New Jersey or New York, maybe they should educate grown adults about how their bodies work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Just the lies we've seen to create fear in people over this issue has been unbelievable to me, because they haven't told the truth of what this decision means. They haven't told the truth on the realities of how these decisions are made, that when the women's life is in danger, when the woman is threatened, or it's not a viable pregnancy, all the medical options are there that she will be making with her doctor, and that's entirely appropriate. So even when these doctors do procedures on these babies in the womb,
Yeah.
They call them patients. They give them patients' rights. They treat them as a different individual than they do the mother. So how can anybody say in an intelligent conversation that if that is a patient and it has rights, how is that not also a human being and a life? And that is the discussion that people need to start reconciling in their brains and in their conversations around this subject, is the fact that, we've advanced a long ways in the last 10 to 15 years. We have a lot of answers that we didn't have before. Technology has given us a bigger glimpse into what these babies feel and how aware they are and what goes on and the medical opportunities and decisions that are made. So having that conversation is incredibly important, and it's not happening from the left. Instead, they're using old 50, 40-year-old arguments to try to scare people into just falling in line.
Yeah. Talking with Governor KRISTI Noem of South Dakota, your book, Not My First Rodeo, Lessons from the Heartland. I have to tell you, this is the type of book that I would expect someone who's thinking about expanding their political stage in 2024 to write. What are your thoughts on 2024?
Well, I think it'll be an important presidential election, but the book wasn't based on that at all, or even the decision to write the book based on that at all. These things kind of start a long time ago. I think the first discussions around this book happened over 2 years ago, when I was telling a friend of mine, Charlie Hurt, a few stories, and he said, "Man, you got to write a book. These are hilarious." Or, "Do you know how unique it is that you grew up the way that you did?" And different people were asking, and publishers said things, but this is more a story of really the story of South Dakota. People ask if it's a political book, and it's not really political, although there are some stories in there and political leaders that I share some knowledge about and decisions. But I also go back into my life and help people understand a little bit about why I make the decisions that I make, how I learned my political philosophy and role of government in my life. It was from the lessons my mom and dad taught me on our family ranch. And a lot of that, I think, is good lessons for the American public to hear today. And we saw after COVID that a lot of people were disenfranchised with what was going on in cities and were hungry to get a sense of the American West again and wanted to get out in the country. And this story and this book will open their eyes a little bit to the value of doing that.
Yeah. One last question. Talking with Governor KRISTI Noem, the book is Not My First Rodeo. Just came out the very end of June. She's on a horse on the cover. I like the cover. I like it because it's authentic. You can tell it's not staged like some of these other people. So I have to ask you, the big elephant in the room, because I followed this a year ago. I didn't follow everything with the law on the transgender sports thing in South Dakota because I was watching it in my state in Texas. I was watching it. A number of other states were grappling with this, and it seemed as I watched as some of my my good grassroots conservative friends were taking issue with this. And I always hate it when I feel like mom and dad are fighting. So tell me what's happening, because it seemed like there was a split between you and some of the most hardcore conservatives kind of on the GOP side with the transgender bill that you were dealing with in South Dakota. What happened with this? Tell me.
Well, I talk about this in my book. There's actually a chapter on this issue because for years, I've been bullied by liberals. This was the first time I was bullied by my friends. And it was very discouraging for me because they didn't tell the truth. And maybe it was a competitive nature. They had different agendas for doing it. I don't know for sure. But I'd been fighting for fairness in girls' sports for years. In fact, back when I was in Congress, I fought the federal government and kept them out of the sport of rodeo. They had told us we had to go gender neutral in rodeo events. We couldn't have men's events and women's events. And I fought them alone and won the battle. So my history on this subject is incredibly clear. And when I got to this issue and the legislature gave me a flawed bill that would have ended up in court and tied my hands to actually enforcing and protecting girls' sports, I told them to change it. I sent it back to them, told them to change the language so it was a strong bill. When they refused to and it failed, I did executive orders that exact same day to protect girls' sports. Nobody covered that, not even my friends. Instead, they just blew me up for the flawed bill that the legislature didn't want to fix. And I kept those executive orders in place for over a year to ensure that only girls could play in girls' sports until I could get the strongest bill in the nation passed this year. And it was the very first bill that I got passed and signed into law in legislative session in 2022. And it'll withstand any court challenge and be something that will continue to set incredible precedent for now other states to follow our example.
you go. The book is Not My First Rodeo, South Dakota Governor KRISTI Noem. Congrats on the book as well. And we'll watch and see what else
you.
comes out of South Dakota. Thanks for joining
I
us.
appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You too.